thing I like to actually, I probably model mine. The thing I like is that you would include complete cases, which it wasn't because he was lazy or not everything,
Right.
it was because he thought he was really
Right.
exposed to the full.
Well, I don't use a case book in elegance because I don't teach. But I do have 7 or 8 cases of anyone calling themselves an ambulance stop dog, correct? And I give them the
whole thing.
in part because I am.
Okay, everybody, I guess it's 1 o'clock, so we'll get started. This is the rather optimistically titled Teaching Code in Law Clinics presentation. I'm Judson Mitchell. I'm from Loyola College of Law in New Orleans, which I'm sure all of you have heard of. If you haven't, it's a scrappy little Jesuit school in New Orleans. We're known for our civil law tradition, for our clinic, for educating most of the lawyers and judges in Louisiana, not the indicted ones, the good ones. And this is our 100th year. We're celebrating our 100th anniversary this year. I'll tell you a little bit about myself to start, just so you know where I'm coming from. As we go through the talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about the justification for this clinic. Then I'm going to show you some of our projects. And then I'm going to tell you about some of the things that went wrong. We used to call them mistakes, they now call them lessons learned. So I'm going to show you some lessons learned about this whole process. My specialty, legal specialty, is criminal defense and homelessness. And I litigate and try criminal cases with students and have been doing so for about 15 years. I teach a clinic in criminal defense. But I had this weird hobby of writing code. I don't know why. I didn't watch Star Trek as a teenager, do any geeky kind of things, but for some reason, I love writing code, and I've been doing it, as I said, for about 15 years. And it was always as a hobby, and it started to creep into my law work in New Orleans and at Loyola after Katrina. When Hurricane Katrina came through, I was working for the clinic, and you may or may not know the story, but basically the whole city was evacuated, and our clinic moved to Houston for 3 to 4 months. And we didn't have access to any of our cases, any of our documents, files, client phone numbers, anything, because everybody had just evacuated to avoid the storm. So when we got back, the faculty in my clinic said, since you're the geek around here, you need to figure out some way we can always have access to our cases. And this was back in 2005, long before Clio had come out and some of the other web-based case management systems. And at the time, you had things like Time Matters, which were very local based. They ran on the local network. So I looked through everything that was out there, didn't find it very satisfactory, and so I wrote my own called Clinic Cases. Some of you may have heard of it. This is an example right here. It's a free and open source case management system that runs in PHP on the web. Many law clinics around the country use it, not a majority or anything, but a good number. And we, of course, use it at Loyola. And the way I sort of got into teaching this clinic was I was giving a presentation about clinic cases at that citadel of evil, the University of Alabama.
Roll time.
This is being recorded, right? This is for you, Saban. I was at the University of Alabama giving a presentation about clinic cases, and my boss, Bill Quigley, happened to be there. And he said, you've got to figure out some way to incorporate this into your clinical work. We need to have some kind of law and technology clinic. And of course, at the time, I had yet to meet people like Mark Lordson or all the various people who have been in this for a number of decades. And so I had no idea what to do. I didn't know how was I going to start a technology clinic, how was this going to work. I was very unsure, and I had a lot of doubts. In fact, to this day, I sort of have doubts about the utility of certain parts of what I'm teaching the students. And so part of this talk today is going to be a justification for what I'm doing. I think my doubts started when one day I was sitting in court waiting for my case to get called, and this very veteran, grizzled death penalty lawyer was sitting next to me, and we were having a chat like lawyers do before their cases are called. And he asked me, well, how are things going at the clinic? What do you guys up to? And I said, I'm teaching a thing with law and computers next semester. And he looked at me and he said, what do computers have to do with it? And that's always sort of been in my mind since that time. What do computers have to do with it? And if you'll notice, I don't know if you all have been following the conference Twitter feed, but there are other people out there who have doubts about this entire movement. I don't know, some of you must know who Scott Greenfield is. He's I guess you'd call him a gadfly for any law tech event that comes up. He's sure to troll it and to talk about how, what relevance does this have for lawyers? You're wasting time, etc., etc. I tweeted him back and I said, hey, I'm trying to make it relevant for lawyers. Come to my presentation on Friday at 1 o'clock. And he tweeted back, well, no thank you, I'm not coming. I don't think he's interested in coming. Having said that, the guy makes some valid criticism. There's a lot of boosterism, maybe excessive enthusiasm about technology and law, and not a lot of hard details about how does this come down to the client and lawyer level. So I've been giving this a lot of thought over these last, it's now been 3 years, looking at it, and I've come up with at least some ideas. Why do we teach code in clinics? Why should we do that? So getting back to the question I was asked. The first thing is, not every class that's taught in a law school is a casebook class or a statute class where you're looking at the statutes and you're analyzing the statutes. We have a lot of classes that are not strictly law related. If you look in the catalog of your law school, you're probably going to see a class something like this, legal accounting. And a lot of the same arguments that can be made against a tech clinic or a tech class could be made against this. Why do law students need to learn accounting? They're going to hire someone to do it for them anyway, right? They don't need to become accountants. What's the purpose of giving them a class that's not related to their subject area? You could say all the same thing about tech. Why does a lawyer need to know about tech or to design things or apps or how databases work? They can hire somebody to do that, and that person can explain it to them. Well, our curriculum already has this kind of thing in it. So it's not that unusual. Secondly, and if any of you ever worked in programming, I know many of you have, the computer is a vicious mistress. It demands logic and rigor in its thinking at all times. And if it doesn't get it, what does it do? It breaks. And it's a great training in legal reasoning to have that kind of rigor and application logic taught to you. There's a lot of similarities between computer programming logic and legal logic. So there's a real intellectual connection there, I find. Third reason is it prepares students for new law-related career opportunities. If you were in Professor Granite's lecture a few hours ago, you'll see that the job growth is in non-traditional legal jobs, jobs where you're using technology to bring legal services to people. I, for one, I really honestly think that legal cases in the not-too-distant future are going to be decided by algorithms, and that lawyers are going to be people who tamper or mess with algorithms and need to understand how that's done. In my jurisdiction, it almost seems like cases are already decided by algorithms. For example, if I file an appeal to the Louisiana Supreme Court, they're very advanced, very sophisticated. I know they're applying an algorithm to my appeal. They say, is this an appeal? Yes. Is it a criminal appeal? Yes. Then it's denied. That's their algorithm. That's how they do it. Hopefully we can have more sophisticated ones in the future, and I think we're going that way. So if students start to think in an algorithmic way and start to work with the tools that compose those, I think they get an advantage. If nothing else, it's a great talking point. I've now had 20 students go through this clinic in 2 years, and 2 of them have come back to me and said, the first thing when I went to a job interview, they looked at it and they saw Technology and Legal Innovation Clinic. What's that? And we talked about that, and they loved it. So hey, at least they're getting good interview talking chat points and good cocktail chat, I guess, if nothing else. So that's my very basic justification for what I do. As I said, when I started this clinic, I really didn't have a lot of models. I didn't know the people who were involved. I had a very nice chat with Mary Zulak at Columbia, who has been doing a clinic like this for quite some time. And I took some things from her model, and then the rest of it, I just sort of put together Louisiana style, made it into gumbo, put everything in and see if it works. So the clinic where I teach is a very litigation-oriented clinic. Everybody goes to court, everybody litigates. There is no space in our curriculum for non-litigation clinics. We don't do simulations, we don't do anything that's not going to court. So it was not an option for me to have an all-code clinic. We had to have students going to court. As it turns out, that was a pretty good thing. I didn't have a problem with that. So we have this sort of schizophrenic class. Luckily, our clinic is 2 semesters long and 5 hours. So the students have 10 hours to do all this stuff in over the course of a year. They learn traditional clinical lawyering skills. We do client interview, direct and cross-examination, motion drafting, jury selection. They go to court, they appear in court, they represent people. While they're there, they're told to look around. How, and answer this question, how can technology make this better? Now, if you've ever had the pleasure of going to Orleans Criminal District Court on the corner of Tulane and Broad, which unfortunately none of you ever had, it's the highest volume criminal courthouse in America, and law is practiced there exactly the same way it was in 1927. Nothing has changed. They got a computer system in 1973, and that's it. Everything else is very old school. You don't file pleadings at the clerk's office, you have to file them in open court. You don't show up for court at a given time, you wait in attendance until the judge is ready to hear you. So it's a very peculiar sort of system. So there are plenty of opportunities for students to say, this sucks. Technology can make this better. It's a great way to do it. So that first semester, they're focusing on that. However, we have classes in technology. Our Thursday classes, every other Thursday class is about technology. We start, strangely enough, with building a website, which is, to my mind, not really a very tech thing, but to some people's mind it is. The reason I make them do this is because after the first year, the first group went through, they did their project, it was great, and one of the students, right after he graduated, called me up on the phone and said, okay, how do I do a website? And I said, that looks really bad that you went through a tech clinic and you can't even do a website. So they're now all required to learn how to do that. We learn how to set up a server, we learn how to register a domain name, we learn the basics of WordPress. Every student has to have a law practice site. This is Mr. Shockey's site. We have lawyers come and talk to them about how they use the web to generate business, because all my guys, all my students are going to be solos, so they need to know that. Talk about SEO, all that kind of stuff. Once they got that basic skill out of the way, we can sort of move on to some stuff. We learn the languages we learn. The language is JavaScript. I don't teach them any server-side languages at all for a number of reasons. First of all, one language is a lot for them already. But secondly, with things like Node, it's really not necessary to know more than JavaScript to do the kind of things that we're doing these days. So learning the basics of JavaScript is a useful thing. We do HTML, CSS. I have a guy come and give a talk about UI design and how to do it properly and to make it usable. We do some data manipulation. They do queries on SQL databases, usually with police call data. And then somewhere at the end of the first semester, they have to propose a project. The students work in groups. The reason for that is because I have 10 students in the clinic. If they all had 10 projects, it would be a total nightmare. So we try to cut it to, 3 or 4 projects, people working in groups. And what they've come up with, and again, we've only had 2 years of this, but so far, the projects they come up with, a lot of calculators. Whatever. We do the low-hanging fruit of the legal world. Calculators are easy. They see how that works. Great. They've come up with a lot of calculators. One group came up with a parser, which I'm going to show you. And then, of course, decision trees are also a very popular category. So that's how the clinic works. It's a whole year. It's very litigation-oriented in the fall, and in the spring, it's very, very tech-oriented. So let's look at some of our projects. This is the first one I'm going to show you today. It's a juvenile justice calculator. The students want to call it Juju, which I think gives it bad luck or something. We'll put some voodoo thing on it, but that's fine. The way this got started is the fellow who's the executive director of the local public defender office for juveniles called me up and said, hey, I see what you're doing over at Loyola. I got a couple of apps that if y'all would look at and do for me, I'd really appreciate it. And one of his ideas was this calculator. He wanted something that his lawyers could take to court and use to calculate the cost of different sentencing possibilities. He was going to give me the data. He's going to get the best study information. How much does incarceration cost? How much does probation cost? How much do alternate therapies cost? And he wanted me to put it into a UI so that the lawyers could quickly go, Judge, if you give this person sentence A, it's going to cost $50,000 for the state. If you give him sentence B, it's going to cost $5,000. And he thinks, and he's probably right, that has some influence. We're not worried about justice, we're worried about cost, right? So we sort of got started on it. I like the idea because it's pretty simple, right? We take some data, we add it up, and we show it back to the user. So this group got started with that, and eventually what came of it is what you see here. This is the web-based version of Juju. I'll show you, let's see, I'll show you what it looks like in an iPhone emulator. It would look something like this on the iPhone. And essentially what the lawyer would do, he'd say, okay, Judge, you want to give him 1 year secure custody. Great, that's going to cost $118. Let's say we throw in some therapy, that's going to cost that much. But if you give him, probation for a year, it's going to cost less. Oh, I'm sorry, I redid it. Let me do it again. Secure custody, 1 year. Therapy, that much more. Probation, 1 year. And we scroll down, then we get the difference. And so I could say, Judge, look, sentence 1 is $111,000 more expensive, and email the results to the judge. So that was the first iteration of that app. It's actually now available on the app stores, Android and iPhone. And we're working on a second one, which is going to be a little more sophisticated. This is a very simple app, but that's why I liked it. Simple is good. Complicated is bad, especially when working with third-year law students. So that's that first app. Now, what did they learn from this? They had to work with data structures. You see, we have a JSON file here. Pretty straightforward. The name of the sentencing alternative, the cost, the number of interval of days, and then a little help file that goes with it. So they learned how to change the JSON and how to put it into the program, and with my assistance, they learned how to read the JSON and to actually get it out into the HTML. They learned logic, obviously. This is one of the functions in there. It's very straightforward. It's just adding up two totals and getting the difference and figuring out which one is bigger or lesser. Now, of course, when the students are doing this, it doesn't come out looking like pretty printed JavaScript with no errors. What I had them do is sort of pseudocode instead. This is actually from a different app because I couldn't find the pseudocode for Juju, but this is for this app. And I basically tell them, just write it out in a logic tree. If one thing is true and this thing is true, then do this. If not, do this. All students understand this easily. The only time they get frustrated is when they actually have to put it in JavaScript because they don't understand why do the parentheses have to line up like that, and why do I have to have a semicolon at the end? And so they get a lot of errors in the JavaScript, and that's when they come to me. So we start with the straight logic, and then I help them. I help them through. This is a very professor helping kind of class. If I just sent them off to do this on their own with JavaScript, maybe some of them could do it, but most of them won't be able to do it. So I'm happy to help them and to show them how their logic gets transferred into working computer code. And obviously they learn presentation. We need a div, we need some rows, we need a footer, we need a header, that kind of stuff. Usually that's the easiest, teaching in HTML. Now this is Bootstrap specific code, and sometimes it's a little bit challenging to explain why these classes have to be in a certain place. But again, that's just one of the challenges of the clinic. So that's the kind of stuff they're taking away from projects like this. The second project I want to focus on was Mr. Zadi and Mr. Tassin's project. This is one of these criminal court projects. They had a bunch of cases at criminal court, and they were trying to track them using the available online resources. And they said, this is not cool. We need some way to manipulate this online docket master, is what it's called in New Orleans, so that we can keep up to date on what's going on with our cases. This was a problem. I'm going to show you why it was a problem. This is what the Orleans Parish docket master looks like on the web. It's a pre-formatted 1973 era document. There's no database that you can access, no JSON, no fields, nothing. It's basically free text. So if the students come to you and say, we need to figure out some way that we can make this into a service, you're like, it's impossible. It can't be done. It can't be done. Well, it turns out it could. There's a lady named Grania O'Neill, who is the rare combination of a lawyer and a coder and a female, which is pretty unusual as well, who actually, while she was in New Orleans, wrote a PHP class that tried to parse this stuff. And she told me about it, and I said, well, show me your code, because I got some students who are working on a project that could use it. So we took her class that she wrote, I made some changes to it, and I got the students working on the UI, and what emerged was something we call Docket Minder. And essentially what it does, it's pretty straightforward, I'm sure you can guess, is you put in your case that you want to file. We run a cron job on the server every night that scrapes the sheriff's, those particular dockets. I don't know if the sheriff cares about that. They haven't ever said anything to me. But, I do it in the open. I'm scraping your stuff. And it just runs a diff on the cached copy of the docket that we have versus what's up on the sheriff's server that night. If there's a difference, it says, bingo. It sends an email out and tells us what happened in the case. Which is something that you could not do before. Now, those of you who practice in modern jurisdictions, you may think, what's the damn big deal? Don't you know what went on? I mean, you should be able to find this stuff out. Well, no, not where we are, because all kind of things happen on the docket that the lawyers are not aware of. For example, in this case, right here, it closed out, the students closed it in April or March or something. I got a docket minder reminder Monday, as I was getting ready to come up here, that said the client has failed to pay the fines and fees and there's an alias capias out for his arrest. I would never have known that. But the fact that the docket minder told me that, I was able to get on the phone with students and say, look, we gotta fix this, y'all. We gotta fix this. So he goes in and pays his fines and gets an extension. So it's a useful thing, and predictably, the people who find this the most useful are the local public defenders. And we make all of these projects available. All the code is open source, which I'll show you at the end, and we provide a service to them for free. So many of them find this very useful. They put their cases in and they updated on what's happening. The last one I want to show you is called Interactive Decision Tree, and it's based on the work of Shannon and Etta, who graduated in 2013. The way this project got started is I have a former student named Adrian Wheeler, who has a nonprofit now, which is dedicated to helping ex-offenders find employment and to remove barriers to employment. And one of the principal ways they do that is through expungements. And in fact, they've been very successful. There's a lot of demand for this that's not met by the local legal community. In fact, they had an expungement day, it was last year, year before that, last year, where they invited the general public to come in for expungements, and there were lines literally around the block and down the next street waiting to get in to get this service. And so Adrian came to me and said, is there some way that your clinic can do some kind of app or something that can at least screen out the people that are not eligible, so we don't have to have them wait in line. If they can't use the app or they don't have a phone, they can get a friend or a caseworker or something, so that we can not maybe have this rush every time we have an expungement day. And I talked to these students about it, we thought about it, and it seemed pretty obvious that what we needed was a decision tree. I'm sure most of you all are familiar with the concept of decision tree. So we looked around on GitHub. There's a guy named Warren Harrison who had an interactive decision tree project in PHP that looked pretty good. So we forked it, and we sort of skinned it out a little bit, and we added a couple things to it. For example, since we're lawyers, we have to have our disclaimers. So we put in a little thing where you could write in a disclaimer into the tree, style it up a little bit, and put some things in the back end. And the way this works is, and this is part of Warren's code, is essentially you write out the decision tree in your browser. Ask a question, yes, no, and this actually goes on for a while. And what it generates is an XML file, which is then parsed by the JavaScript when it's actually put to the browser. Great way to do it, because we looked around for different decision tree kind of applications, and most of the stuff was like Windows software, and I don't have any students who use Windows anymore. They all have the glowing apple, right? So that's not going to work. And this was web-based and worked really, really well. So what resulted from it is an app that we did for Adrian's nonprofit, the Justice and Accountability Center, the Leah mobile app, which is now pending approval in the App Store. I don't know if any of y'all had the experience of Steve Jobs' App Store, but it's an absolute pain in the ass. And I could yell and scream about it forever if I wanted to, but y'all probably don't want to hear about that. So this one's awaiting approval, and I'll show you a little bit about how that works. This is, again, an iPhone simulator. You got to read the disclaimer. Everybody's got to read the disclaimer. It's not legal advice, blah, blah, blah. We agree, and we're in. And it just goes through, just like any decision tree, and asks you questions. Do you have yeah, let's say I do. Let's say, just for brevity's purposes, I'm seeking an expungement for an offense that was not committed in Louisiana. Well, then let's go through. Felony. It has a help system. So, for example, we ask them, were you convicted of one of these crimes? You can click on it, and it brings up the crime so they can see if they have a crime of violence, because if it is a crime of violence, you probably can't get it. Let's go through here. No. 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 Yes. Yes. Yes, I did. A lot of questions to get through. But anyway, here's the killer app feature here. On the back end, we created a database of pro bono or low bono attorneys who would be willing to take referrals. That would take some of the burden off of Adrian's organization and allow her to keep a community of attorneys who are interested. So the back end has a database of attorneys, and essentially when you click on contact an attorney, it tries to get your location from the browser. I don't know if it's going to do well or not here, probably not, since we're in Boston and we don't have any Boston attorneys, but let's go with that. And it'll bring up a screen of potential lawyers who can help you. You click the button, it calls their office or their cell. You click their name, you go to their website. So it works really well for referral, for screening and referral. Now, the good thing about this system is it could be used for anything. Any kind of legal services organization could do their own decision tree with their own questions, have their own referral sources or not if they don't want to, plug it in, it's very simple to do, and make an app. So this is not just a one-time deal. You could go to GitHub, fork it, and make your own app that does a similar thing with relatively little effort. And that's one of the goals of our project, is to make solutions that can be reproduced elsewhere. Like, for example, the calculator thing I showed you to start with. You put your own data in, you change a name, whatever you want to do, and you have your own calculator for sentencing or whatever it is you want to use it for. So that is that app. We've done a number of others, and if you're interested in looking at them, they're all at loyolalawtech.org/projects.
Question?
Yes.
Apologize for the more initiated in tech, but could you explain what you meant by GitHub, fork it, and also if there's any alternative to the App Store?
Those are all wonderful questions. There's so many techie type people here that I'm taking things for granted. You're quite right. GitHub is it's a really important website. I spend a lot of my time on this website. Essentially, what Git is is a version control system that software developers use to keep track of changes in their code. You can use it for other things, but it's very common with software. And GitHub is basically a social site or a public site where you can post the code so other people can see it and share it. The sharing of the code is called forking. If you see a project that you like and that you want to do something with, you just click fork, and all of a sudden it's your project. And you can make whatever changes and use it however you want, subject to the terms of the license. Almost every project that's on GitHub is MIT licensed, meaning you could do anything you want with it, basically. So it's a great resource for finding software and projects. It's very, very important in the tech community, and a good site. Are there any other questions? I know I'm talking kind of fast and going through some things.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
The other question is there an alternative to your hated app store?
No. No. It's the fundamental evilness of Apple's system. That's the way they want it. Everybody has an iPhone. I bet you everybody in this room has an iPhone. I bet you do. I'm seeing a lot of glowing apples. And the way that, that was part of Steve Jobs' genius. He wanted to lock it all down. So I couldn't send you a file with an Apple design app, and you can't just put it on your phone. It doesn't work like that. They have it very, very tight. They control what goes in the store, what's done with it, and they are the only legitimate distribution channel. Now, I'm sure there are hacky ways to get around it, but no one's going to be using your app if you're not going through the App Store. Android Store is much better. They're a little more freewheeling. They'll take whatever crap you put up there, and they'll put it out, which is great. I really have a real problem with app stores in general, and I think the web took a wrong turn, or technology took a wrong turn with that. There's no reason why the browser on your phone could not be just as good a container for apps as those apps are. I'm going to show you a little bit about that in a minute. But we're stuck with it now, because if you're not on iPhone, you don't exist. So you've got to play by their rules. Maybe that will change one day. Yes?
Okay, so the App Store thing, I'm just going to say, if you're forking something on GitHub, so you find some code on GitHub, if it's making an app for one platform, you're pretty much going to only modify it to that. If you had source code that you're modifying and it's for a website versus for an app, that's what you're going to be able to easily modify it to.
Right,
so
right.
That's why you're stuck in that.
And that's the beauty of the web. It's free, it's open, you can put whatever you want onto it. So yeah.
Yeah, so it's not, I mean, it's kind of like what do you want to take and modify, and that has its own limitations with it.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. Let's take a look at the tools that we use to do this stuff. My, if you're going to write software code, you have to have a text editor. Text editors are a religious thing among hackers. If you want to see a nice street fight, go to Hacker News and make a post about, any text editor and say it sucks. And there are going to be 3,000 responses that come immediately. Hackers take their text editor very, very seriously. I, for example, use Vim. Vim is the greatest single piece of software ever invented by humanity. It is the greatest software there is. The greatest text editor there is. I will stop. Having said that, it has a learning curve that's the size of Mount Kilimanjaro. It's very hard to learn. It's worth it, but it's hard to learn. And there's no way I'm going to get any law students to learn Vim. That's just not going to happen. So we use much simpler tools. We've been using something called IceCoder, PHP project, open source, on GitHub. I think it uses the ACE editor as its backend, and it allows the students to go up onto their personal space on our server and edit files and not create a lot of damage. So they do all their HTML and their JavaScript files up here. I can easily go and take a look and see what they're doing and suggest changes. It's a nice project. I really recommend it if you have your own server space and you want students to work on that server space. Have a look at that. It's very fully featured. It has linting, it has code completion, support for many, many languages, and of course it's free and open source. If you don't have your own server, there are tons of online IDEs out there. And an IDE, I don't want to neglect explaining for people who don't know, it's just a development environment where you can do all the things you need to do to create your application. The best one, there are several really good ones out there. Cloud9, I think, is the best, at least for my purposes. It's free, has a lot of utility. It gives you access to virtual servers. You can file up a Node instance, you can file up PHP instance, or whatever you need. So that's a very, very good choice if you're looking for something that's cloud-based. And what you would do is you'd have all the students have their own account and share with you what they've created. So it's very good. For UI, we use Bootstrap because there are not enough hours in the day to do UI design. It's before Bootstrap came along, it used to be very maddening to be able to just get HTML to render properly between Firefox IE and then when Chrome came in. Now that you're dealing with many, many more screens and your app really needs to work on the desktop, it needs to work on the phone, it needs to work on the tablet, you almost have to use some kind of framework, CSS framework, like Bootstrap. I was in a presentation yesterday where the fellow talked about Foundation, which is also another very good one. But Bootstrap is much more commonly used, and the reason that's important to me is if the students have a question, they can usually go to sites like Stack Overflow, look it up and find the answer, rather than coming to me and having me look it up on Stack Overflow. So Bootstrap is the best for our purposes. And then this little piece, this gem. The question is, how do you get your HTML and your JavaScript into people's phones in an app? Some of you may be aware of the PhoneGap application, which is runs on your own machine. And essentially what it does is translate or moves your HTML and JavaScript into, I don't know if it actually makes it into C# or whatever, but essentially it makes it into code that the phone can understand, that you can get on the App Store. The thing about Build is it's online. It's made by Adobe. They're doing a lot of stuff to make up for Flash. They have a lot of great service. This service is great. Brackets code editor is great. Adobe's doing a lot of great stuff this last year.
Not Creative Cloud.
Was that?
Not Creative Cloud.
Yeah, well, maybe not that. And essentially, what this is you don't have to download the Android SDK or the Apple SDK. That's another problem with Apple is because you have to own an Apple computer if you want to develop Apple apps. PhoneGap Build gets that all out of the way. Essentially, you upload your JavaScript and HTML, and it will actually make the proper files for you so that you can get them submitted directly to the App Store. So if you're doing anything that's mobily based, I highly recommend these folks. It's free as well. The only time they charge you is if your code is closed source, which is a great policy. If your code is publicly hosted, if it's on GitHub, it's free. So really useful to use. So let's talk about the mistakes or the lessons learned. As you can imagine, this clinic is a lot. It's really a lot for a student to take in how to actually practice law. They have to stand up in court for the first time in their lives and actually say something, and at the same time learn about variables and loops and statements and all that. It's a lot to take in. And the students have told me it's a lot to take in. So the problem comes up is I'm working on my tech project, but I got a client who just got thrown back into jail because he messed up his probation. Obviously the client comes first. So the code gets thrown out the window while we represent the client because that's our ethical obligation to do so. So doing both of these things at the same time can be very difficult. It has a lot of advantages because it allows them to identify real-world problems, stuff that they see as practicing lawyers, and turn them into technological applications. But the downside is that the code is always going to be second. Our speaker this morning was talking about, and she was exactly right, I know she doesn't like the phrase, but this idea that today's students are digital natives and they just get computers. And I totally agree with it. It's just wrong, completely wrong. Students know how to upload to Facebook and maybe do some basic stuff with Excel. But if you look out on the classroom and you see the glowing apples and you say, okay, everybody, open your terminal. You'll get blank stares. They don't even know they have it. They don't know that their glowing apple has a terminal. And that's just the beginning. You know, it's very hard to learn how to make a computer do what you want it to do when you're talking to it in code. So they have trouble. They need help. They're not going to figure it out by themselves. They can go to help websites and things like that, but you need to have someone around on a fairly regular basis who can go over stuff with them and teach them in a tutorial-like fashion. So we don't do a lot of lectures when we get to the tech stuff. They come to my office with their distinct problems and we work through them in a tutorial fashion. Projects will fail. We've had projects where the students did a lot of work on them, but we couldn't get them to go for one reason or another. And maybe we needed a partner to play ball with us to give us some data, and that never came through. Or maybe, as it turns out, this wasn't such a great idea. And I tell them, you know, your project may fail, but what I'm going to grade you on is, what did you do? Did you make the effort? Do you show a demonstrated effort? Did you at least make some progress? And can you tell me why your project failed? So not everybody comes out with a shiny app or a shiny web-based thing they're going to do. Some of them have nothing, but hopefully they got some learning out of it. And most importantly, I guess, is the fewer projects, the better. The first year I did it, everybody had their own project. Yeah. And if you know, clinics usually are limited to about 10 students per professor. At least that's supposed to be ideal, according to the ABA. So I had 10 projects to deal with, and it was tough. And I'm still supporting a number of those projects. So, you know, they go off to happy, happy lawyer land, and professor is left in the back, you know, offering support. I was just updating one of the programs from 2 years ago with some new data. So the fewer, the better. You can get like 2. That's really good, I think, for a year. One of the things I think that we've learned, though, we're going to try some stuff a little differently next year. Not because of this clinic in particular, but just because of some things that we're doing in our law school. We're going to split it up into 2 one-semester clinics. Totally moving the criminal thing to its own clinic, probably where it belongs, and having an all-code clinic in the spring. And I'm interested to see how that works. I think I've already seen some effects already. The number one effect is that I have a lot more people signing up for it. Why? Because we don't have the 10-person limit. And secondly, because it's drawing the kinds of students who, for whatever reason, wouldn't normally take clinic. We have this thing in our law school where all the people who are on law review, for example, they think they can't do clinic because they have to do so many hours of work in the law review. I'm not really sure that's true, but they all think that. So I got a bunch of law review people who came to sign up for my one-semester code clinic because they knew that they could fit that in their schedule. And we're going to let in a lot more than 10. It's probably going to be a class of 15 to 20 people, which is pretty large for a clinic. And we're going to see how that works. So I don't know that I have the answer. I'm not sure that this is even the best model. I know that you folks at Columbia have been doing this for a long time, and I think before you came in, I talked to Mary Zulak about y'all's clinic.
Yeah, no, she's mentioned.
Yeah. And so I'm not sure what the best model is.
Right.
I don't know that either of ours is, but you know, at least I can say we've had some good come out of it. I mean, we have created applications that are being used by actual lawyers in Louisiana, you know, and so that's something. Question?
For your one semester, are you going to have any observation at all?
I'm not planning on it. I'm not planning on it. By the time these guys start this clinic, they'll be in their second semester of their third year.
Okay.
And presumably some teachers, or everybody goes for some observation for something. Usually the criminal law professor will make them go down, the Evans professor will make, so they at least will have seen some things in court. So I think the answer is no. I think the way we get the real world in is we're going to have outside speakers come and talk about, you know, their practices and what they need technology for, and they'll get that sort of hands-on thing. But I'm really thinking about teaching it as sort of an undergraduate class. You know, 16 assignments, you know, for 16 weeks with a homework, a test, and a project at the end. You know, and I want to see if that works. I don't know. I've never taught exactly like that in law school, but it might work. Yes.
How are you going to handle the time overhead? I've done some of the teaching of code in my classes, and I find I actually schedule half an hour one-on-ones with the students to bring them in, and as you get larger numbers and bigger class sizes, that becomes untenuous.
I'm sure you're right, but I'm a sucker for a disaster, I'm gonna give it a go and see what we can do. Obviously, the way it's gonna be set up is we're gonna have class time and then we're gonna have tutorial time, office hours, throughout the week, where people come in for individual sessions. It's gonna take up a lot of my time, but I assume that since I'll be going to court a little bit less, I can make up the time doing that. And I'm almost considering having everybody work on the same project, so that they can learn from each other on, their different mistakes kind of thing. Like, we're gonna build a client screener this semester. This is what, and I'll build a sample. I won't show them the code. Here's what it should look like. Y'all can do your own ideas. And then they can work together while they go through so that we don't have 3 or 4 projects. I don't know if that's gonna work either, but we're gonna try.
Do you make the tutorials mandatory?
I should. If they don't come, then there's a problem. Because nobody has figured stuff out by themselves yet. I mean, I don't know why, but I've always had to help them through, and I'll give them a particular assignment and say, all right, now go back and fix this, find all that, go run this through a linter, find the errors, fix that, and then try this. So I don't know. I think I will probably have to make them mandatory. I would hope that, and I want the students to be interested in doing it for the sake of doing it, rather than just for following the rules. So they usually show up anyway, so that works out fairly well. So the last thing I wanted to mention is, what about if someone was crazy enough to want to try to do a clinic like this themselves? I'm working on this summer, and right now it's just an empty GitHub repository, but I'm working on a Git book, coding for law students. If anybody wants to help me with that, please just volunteer. That would be great. Which will be a series of exercises that are very much like other introductory coding books, but geared towards legal applications or with a legal emphasis. And then ultimately what I hope to do is to create a web-based application that will help you generate apps like this without having to actually write every little bit of JavaScript, but will allow a student to do enough individualized kind of things that they can see the data structures, they can see some things about the JavaScript. That app is probably application of a year or 2 in the future, I'm sure. But when that is available, I'll certainly let everybody know, and maybe you can take a look at it and see if it's something that you can use in your classes. The thing about it is that these students, 2 or 3 years from now, I don't know, people might not even be using JavaScript anymore. HTML will be out the door. All the stuff that we do, that we learn in class, is ephemeral, more or less, with a few exceptions. And that is the basic concepts of how computer code works and is structured. Loops, variables, arrays, data security, strings, all that kind of stuff. That's never going to go away. And so they're taking that with them, hopefully. The specific skills they pick up in the programming, in the JavaScript programming, I don't know. I've had some students who've actually taken what they've learned and used it in practice. I had one student in particular, Mr. Norris, who, he's a solo now. He has a very active website which uses a lot of innovative techniques to attract clients, and he builds apps. He still comes to me for help, but he uses it as a tool for clients, for client generation. He has a DWI calculator that he wrote so that you can figure out, supposedly, what your blood alcohol level is. I told him, put a big disclaimer on that. I said, I'm not really sure about how you're figuring that out, but he's doing it, and great. If that works, as long as it's got a disclaimer, I'm sure the Bar Association will let it go. So I have started to see some of this come out into the general population, but it'll take time for it to catch on, and I'm quite sure this clinic is going to look totally different in 3 or 4 years, but that's what we're doing now. So does anybody have any other questions? Yes?
Sorry I came late, so I don't know if you answered that, but what's the background of your students?
Background?
Yes.
They're younger. Most people come to Loyola straight from college, so they're all 25 years old.
Are they required to take a test, or do you take any level? I mean, level can be...
We only take 3rd-year law students in the clinic right now. With this 1 semester code clinic, I'm trying to work it so that I can take 2nd years as well, because there really is no reason for them to have to be 3rd years to take a code clinic.
So they are not required to know any IT background or programming?
that wouldn't work because they're not, again, they're digital natives and everything, but you know, they're not a lot of, I have had a couple students who actually did have an IT background or had actually done some coding, and they, you know, they were certainly leaders in the class. But as a general rule, at least as of yet, that's not happening where I am. Yes.
How are you getting past that deer in the headlights? There's like a couple of weeks there, and what's your wisdom?
Yeah, you've definitely done this. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. That's the wonderful thing about doing a criminal defense clinic, because they have that same reaction when they go to court the first time, and they better say something to the judge or make something happen, and you know, they can't stay deer in the headlights. With code, it's a little bit different. Yeah, I think they're very perplexed when they first see what we're going to do, because they're like, oh yeah, I'm doing the code clinic, that's going to be so cool. And then when they find out the amount of information that's going to entail, there is, yeah, I guess you would call it deer in the headlights. And it's just like everything else in life, break it up into small problems. Okay, I know that this is complex, but here's what you're going to do for today. You're going to make, here's what an HTML document looks like. Open up your editor and write one that tells me hello and save it. And you know, we just do it one thing at a time.
So you're doing that with them in class?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're.
They have homework
yeah,
assignments
so
too.
almost lab-like, almost simultaneous lab-like with the comp sci lab.
Has to be. I do, for homework, I do make them do Code Academy, which they like. I'm sure everybody knows, but if you don't, Code Academy is one of these learn to code sites. You can learn any number of languages, and the reason it's good is because you learn by doing. You type in some code, it tells you if you're wrong and exactly why you're wrong. So it's a very, very good tool for beginners starting to learn. So as a resource, I have them do Code Academy on whatever it is we're talking about. But yeah, you cannot lecture. I don't know what they do in computer science places, but you know, the law school, you can't lecture about code. I mean, it's just too boring. And it's not, I don't find it boring. It's not boring, but it's just not anything that really lends itself to the lecture style. It has to be sort of a flipped class, at least to my mind. I don't know, maybe disagree.
You do both, actually.
Yeah, I guess you could.
Usually you have like a 4-hour lab attached to it, like a credit.
I think, to my mind, you need to actually do it. There's a series of web books or websites about different languages. Learn something the hard way, like learn JavaScript the hard way, or learn Perl the hard way, or learn Python the hard way. And what this guy does is he says, if you don't intend to actually write this code down, just don't even bother to do this exercise, because the only way you can actually learn is by typing in the code and seeing where you're making a mistake. It's not one of these things that you can learn abstractly. You actually have to do it. And so that's my philosophy in having the students do it. You know, do this, I'll come over and see what you're doing. Are you doing it wrong? I'll help you, all that, but I need you to type it out. So that's how that goes. Yes?
Have you worked with admissions to try and recruit more STEM students? Or has your clinic been used as kind of a,
Yes.
you're doing this stuff?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, you know, again, I guess this is all part of the technological bubble thing, but this particular clinic has generated a lot of interest outside of law school. And of course, the administration is thrilled with that. And so we've now started a law, technology, and entrepreneurship certificate, and they're building up a big program that deals with that. And it sort of came out of this clinic. So the admissions people are also advertising it as something that's different, because I know that a lot of y'all have sort of things like this at your law schools, but it's very uncommon in the South. I mean, we don't, as far as we know, there are not really any law schools in the South that are doing it. So it's a differentiator for our law school. So the answer is yes to that. I think so. Okay, if you're interested in any of the code that you've seen, or you want to download it, take a look, you can go to loyolalawtech.org. It has links to our GitHub page and to our Twitter feed. Most of the projects you've seen here today are at github.com/LoyolaLawTech. Maybe one or two are at my personal URL, which is github.com/Judson Mitchell. If you all have any questions in the future, if I can be helpful in any way, I love this stuff. I actually wake up in the morning and write code. I don't know why. It's crazy, but I love it. So if you have problems or questions, or maybe interested in doing this in your place, please let me know. I'll be happy to help out. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Want to say hello? Great to meet you. Great to meet you. Mary had mentioned that you spoke in.
I spoke to her, and she told me what you guys did, and I said, do that.
Well,
And I thought it was really something to follow up, because she told me to get all the people in the.
Right, well, see, I have a certain amount of disbelief that anyone else would consider what it is that we do of any value, so, you know, it's, here you are.
It was my inspiration, because it was the only.
Yeah.
Right. We had Al.
Yeah, okay, yeah, no, that's great. That's great, Jeannie, and you guys doing a
We
lot.
should talk.
Yeah.
Very useful.
What's your presentation has been new?
I'm teaching you.
Yeah, I love it,
So
really.
I teach about the website, I teach the I'm teaching them what semantics are, apologies. And then
Yeah, like she said, she was gonna go, but I think everybody left.
Well, you know,
Like, I didn't.
it's not really basic. Some of my students get to
I've shown that 100
exercise and I help them.
Yeah, it's a cool concept.
Well, and I love those, playful software, those sort of
And there's some
I can't
different
think
guys.
I mean, it's really powerful stuff.
And then I do, and then I
Like you need to sort of watch the animation as the birth rate shifts, and then stop and think about
I
it.
love
Right, like, you know,
the paper that's.
what does
Like, I
all
think
of these people are.
it sounded like what you were doing was having them kind of pseudo-code it out,
Like,
and then
it's really empowering.
It will.
Beyond.
It's just, I don't know. It'll get influenced. Because like, think about forms, right?
Which is what I do
It's a rule. Right, it's a rule. A paper version. That's the reluctance I do, just put logic rules in, let's get big questions, and then it gets reviewed. It's not right, so the lawyer originally. It's natural language. Suddenly we.
I mean, there's sometimes that stuff, because I feel
Yes,
like
because it's going to
use like those,
happen
like
anyway,
those,
it's
like
already
dry, like,
just, it's not
you
just
know,
all
so much.
Well, the technologists did it,
Like,
run around lawyers, lawyers are just like,
it's the important decisions.
oh, wait a minute.
That's a really.
You know,
what are you going to do?
That's a good way to say it.
Don't say,
Well,
no, say substantive due process to somebody's government, man, that's a good way to scare them.
Legal.
Redesigning law went for someone. Yeah, we remember that. So we grab something to eat. Want to come? Right downstairs. There's always food. My favorite part of the conference is the States. There's always food.
They're soon, and guess what?
Losing.
Well, they're doing well, I'm talking about bypassing the legislature.
Well, that's actually, I think.
Well, imagine a world where the regulations are written as code, so everybody just goes to pick up its update.
And then they assume you will in a couple hours.
Yeah.
Anyway,
They assume you just took a couple hours to eat it.
Yeah.
That's, I think that's true about pleadings too. In fact, I don't know, refuses. The theory that the way you file pleadings now, if you're lucky, it's a PDF. If you're lucky, that's not true. And a PDF is a gigantic waste of time and space.
It's
Generating it, and something we the taxpayer or store the file, if you reduce it to, and legal documents, there's no actually.
They're data fields.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the judge is chasing file, say, and then you can use it however you want. So if the judge needs 16-point print, he can get his out. If they just wanna see it this way, they can.
I have to introduce you to the Supreme Court Justice, one of our Supreme Court justices in Vermont, Justice Dooley. He comes in and he lectures the engineering class. And he's like, I don't wanna hear what you have to say, I have a law degree.
Works really well.
Lawyers give me the data that's on.
And because you can write it relatively
He said,
quickly.
you want information purveyors, I just want the information purveyors, I don't want all of it.
I mean, if you use.
And this is from a Supreme Court justice. Very interesting, very, very interesting. I just want you to give me the